Well, you're having your meeting at a very peculiar time in the world economy. We are in the greatest recession that we perhaps have ever seen, and Australia, luckily, is bearing very little of the cost of this recession. What's happened has really shaken up the economics and financial communities. And I think most importantly for the trade unions, it has opened the door for a more aggressive and progressive unionism that can actually change the way the capitalist system has been running. Recently, the International Monetary Fund, which has traditionally been this very conservative organization, usually considered enemy of labor groups, has done a complete about-face. And when suddenly sees the IMF talking about, obviously, large stimuli to save economies from disaster, and also placing blame for this crisis onto the financial community. The IMF anticipates a long and painful recession. They've pointed out that whenever there's a banking crisis that precipitates a recession, that takes a long time to cure, and that whenever a recession is synchronized around the globe, that also takes a long time to get out of. So we are headed into, or are in, a lengthy period of time in which the markets will be doing poorly. It's fairly striking in the US. As I walked over to this studio, I passed storefront after storefront in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that was empty. So we have a retail sector that is really troubled in the United States. I assume at your unemployment rate, you don't see anything like that. People sometimes talk about these green shoots, it's getting better. I would be very suspicious of this. I was in Sweden last week, and the Swedish government said, oh, they've been publicizing one positive statistic. But then the Swedish government person said, all the rest of them are still very, very bad. So we're not going to expect to see, I think, a recovery in the global economy, certainly among the advanced countries, for at least 1.5 years. And when the GDP starts to recover, those of us who are concerned about the workers, and obviously that's the trade unions, have to recognize that the recovery in employment will be much slower. Over the last 20 years, employment has recovered more slowly in every single recession that we've had. And this one, I think, is going to be just, it'll be slower than it had been in the jobless recovery that the U.S. had in the early 2000s that the Democrats tried to use against George Bush. We also had a jobless recovery for 2 or 3 years of the Clinton administration, and so too have other countries. So it's going to be a long period before employment comes back. I realize in Australia there's some discussion of jobs famine followed by job feast. In the U.S., we talk about that as a possible V curve. You go down very sharp, you come up very sharp. I would say the odds of a V curve in the U.S. or Europe or Japan, maybe it's 5% or 10%. This is not going to be that type of recovery. So we've got a long haul of difficult decisions to make, and I think important changes to make in the system that runs our economies. And that perhaps is the most important message I'd want to give to people in Australia, where, thank goodness, the recession is not that bad as of now. Knock on wood. That is that this recession has opened a door for really progressive changes in the way the system operates. We all know that inequality has risen massively over the last 20, 30 years. That, in addition to that, many people have had very modest or even negative changes in their real wages. Productivity, I know, has grown in Australia more than real wages. Same thing is true in the United States. Same thing is true in most of the advanced countries. Meaning that when we were having a successful growth period, it was not a growth and prosperity for all people. And this explosion, this negative recession, is probably a warning that the way we were developing was not sustainable. You know, at one point I would have said, well, if the rich get most of the money, they'll just spend it on luxury goods, and if the rest of us get most of the money, we'll spend it some luxury goods, but more on necessities, housing and cars and things like that, food. It now looks as if when the rich get most of the money,